This is the story of Harry Enfield's television programme, the sketch show that, along with its sequel Chums, gave us classic characters that have become part of the comedy language.
I am smoking a fag.
It gave birth to the Fast Show and set the standard for programmes like Little Britain and its eccentric relative, The League of Gentlemen, yet, at the same time, hark back to the days of Dick Emery and Stanley Baxter.
Such a thing, you saucy monkey, at your age. It's all right, young man.
Well, shall I just check over your pipework, then?
Like many successful sketch shows, it started with a group of friends who shared a sense of humour. Unlike others, this wasn't at Oxbridge, but at university in Norwich, with postgraduate studies in a Hackney pub. But for Harry Enfield, Paul Whitehouse, Charlie Higson and Chums, comedy wasn't their first love. This was when the new rock and roll was, well, rock and roll.
Well, it being 1977, comedy was not a career option. If you wanted to go on stage and dance about and entertain your mates, you formed a band. This was before alternative comedy and all that. The idea that you might go on stage and tell jokes was completely alien.
Charlie and I were, and Dave Cummings for that matter, were all involved in bands, really. Didn't think of going into comedy particularly at the time.
There were quite a few musicians up there, so we formed a band. It embarrasses me to think of it now, but it was called the Right Hand Lovers. Charlie was the singer, and Paul and I were the guitarists.
The Lovers were together off stage too. Not for the last time, Paul Whitehouse proved invaluable.
Paul, because he worked at the council, he always knew when these instant lets were coming up on his hard-to-let flats. So eventually, about a third of this estate was occupied by our group of friends.
So it's a bit like the Beatles in hell. It was me and Ted, Charlie and his girlfriend, and Paul was just over the road in the next block, kind of thing.
I'll tell you what it was like. It was like a sort of punk commune. No squatters, though. I didn't approve of squatting. I think some of them were squatters, actually. People like Charlie and Harry, I never squatted. I always paid my rent.
The next move in Charlie Higson's rock career was from the Right Hand Lovers to a more imaginatively named outfit.
Looks like the rain's gonna come down hard and jam my girl.
And then he went on to form this band, the Higsons, and I used to sort of roadie for them a bit.
But there wasn't much future or rent money in ferrying a band around in a transit. So Harry and Brian Elsley, his like-minded mate from university, decided to try and make audiences laugh for some cash.
We started doing stand-up on the circuit, to try and make a bit of money. And so it just sort of happened, it was something to do. Had someone offered me a job then, doing anything, I would have taken it, definitely.
I saw this act called Dusty and Dick in Edinburgh. Harry Enfield and Brian Elsley, who just blew me away.
Can you guess who this chap is?
Why, that's uncanny. It's Neville Chamberlain to the T.
We worked up a stage act for the London circuit, and it was all very right on at the time, and everyone was doing jokes about Thatcher, so we didn't do any jokes about Thatcher or anything right on.
Who's this?
Well, that's easy. It's Winston Churchill. Oh, he's no friend of Winnie's. It's Herr Hitler.
Right again.
Mussolini.
Oh, and I didn't even realise I was doing him.
Probably, yeah.
Encouraged by their Edinburgh Fringe success, Harry and Brian formed Dusty and Dick Productions and started writing for BBC Radio. The duo split in 1985, but single-minded Harry carried on, and before long he met up with John Lloyd, producer of Spitting Image, and showed him something he had written.
I read him this script and he laughed all the way through. He was just I was shaking with nerves, and he said, well, I can't do it, I'm doing this show Spitting Image. So, being young, I said, can I do that? And he said, well, can you do impressions? No, but I'll learn.
Eager Harry realised that the satirical puppet show was an excellent way to get a foot in the door and forge ahead.
And then I told all my friends that I'd got the job, which I hadn't at all. But I thought, well, if I tell them, then I'm going to have to get it, or I'm going to look a complete tit. But really, all the impressions I'd learned, other people already did on the show. And then on the day of the first recording, and I told everyone I was up for the series, on the day he rang me up and said, can you do Jimmy Greaves? I went, yeah, which I couldn't. So I quickly, bloody hell, what does he sound like? I go, yeah, well, something like that.
Funny old year 84, wasn't it, really? I see old Mrs. T was voted Woman of the Year.
So your prediction was wrong, eh, Greavesy?
Yeah, poor old Russell Hartley only come in fourth, didn't he?
So Harry's first important comedy connection was Spitting Image, where he worked alongside then-unknowns Chris Barry, Rory Bremner, Steve Coogan, and the script editor was a man with a finger in every comedy pie, Geoffrey Perkins.
He wasn't really an out-and-out impressionist. What he was a brilliant caricature impressionist.
And then I wrote a sketch for Spitting Image, which was about Prince Philip having a Greek cousin who owned a kebab shop, basically.
Ah, double or a large doner, please.
For you, Macaz, I give bit with me on it, innit?
Yeah, thank you very much.
And that just happened. That was just a sketch on the show. Didn't think any more about it.
But Harry was in the right place at the right time. Saturday Live, Channel 4's comedy show whose middle name was Cutting Edge, was on the lookout for new talent. Harry developed his Spitting Image character into Stavros, which came from his mate Paul's impersonation.
Stavros was a kind of hybrid of a bloke called Adam who worked in our local kebab shop. You can't have them, they don't make the cock anymore. They don't make that anymore.
Hello, everybody, peoples. Welcome. My name is Stavros, and this is my kebab shop, in case you don't know, because you're bloody thick or something.
And also, I nicked quite a lot from a bloke I worked at Hackney Council with who used to do a very good impersonation of a Greek kebab shop owner.
Paul was the classic bloke who was down the pub doing funny voices and being funny and entertaining his mates. And Harry was the bloke down the pub who was nicking it all.
But wherever it came from, Harry brought Stavros to life, and with that kicked off Paul and Charlie's career as comedy writers. He soon became a regular feature on Saturday Live, as well as the 1988 follow-up, Friday Night Live, presented by sparkly Ben Elton and produced by the two Jeffs, Perkins and Posner.
Then we said to Harry, well, what else do you do? Is there anything else? And he said, well, there's this character that evolved into Loads of Money.
Okay, I'll tell you what that is, right? It's Loads of Money!
It was actually Harry's idea to make Loads of Money a plasterer, but it was probably because I was plastering at the time and me and my mate Bentley were probably earning a fair amount of cash, you know, for our work.
A day in the life of a plasterer. In bed in the morning. Dash. Morning, darling. What's your name again?
And we tried it out one week and it just went bonkers. It's Kelvin Mackenzie took it up at The Sun and it took off big time.
Boy, sharp bullets, that'll do. Let's go home. Loads of money!
He's good at his job. He rakes the cash in. You know, he pulls birds and he's got a motor, so have that. And it tied in, I suppose, with that whole Thatcherite, you know, era.
Money, money, money!
As Loads of Money became more and more in demand, it was clear what his co-creators Paul and Charlie wanted: loads of work.
As the character became established, I was quite, you know, forceful about wanting to write for the character, especially as it had made the leap to telly. And so I said that to Harry, and he said, "Fine." You know, he was very keen for me to get involved and write. I mean, obviously, if he hadn't, I would have tracked him down and brutally murdered him.
I think for the first year, Paul and Charlie, they carried on with their day jobs, and then by Loads of Money, they gave up their day jobs, really.
While Charlie and Paul established themselves as comedy writers, Harry wanted to prove that he could do more than two characters. He convinced the two Jeffs to make a mockumentary on the career of a fictitious British actor, which allowed him to play a multitude of roles.
Hello. Sir Norbert Smith, actor, is 80 this week, and in this special television tribute, we look back on his distinguished career on stage and in films.
And it was the original thing that I'd given to John Lloyd, who'd got me on Spitting Image kind of years before.
His childhood love of the music hall was to stand him in good stead for his first major film role, as a sidekick to the popular comedian of the time, Will Silly, in the 1936 film, Oh, Mr. Bank Robber.
All right. Now, there's the safe. Now we'll blow it open.
Blow it open?
Yes, we'll blow it open.
We can't blow it open.
Oh, why can't we blow it open?
Look. It's locked. Yes.
And quite clearly it was developed as a vehicle for Harry to develop his skills at mimicking film actors and characters and characteristics of the time.
I may forget you, my darling, but I'll never forget my sunset.
But it was really just an excuse for us to tackle and have fun with lots of film periods.
Harry's next project was providing all the voices for an animated television series starring the famous Viz magazine character and goalkeeper extraordinaire, Billy the Fish.
After the game, you agree, Billy? Why'd have lost without you?
This led to plans for a kind of Viz comic on TV, where the characters lived in the fictitious town of Nuxton, an idea ahead of its time, when Royston Vasey was only Chubby Brown's real name.
I had an idea to do a sort of soap com, if you like, where there'd be lots of funny characters all living in a village.
I mean, interestingly, you know, the original idea, it was going to be quite similar to the League of Gentlemen in that it was going to take place in this one town.
But then we just thought, oh, bollocks, it's too much like hard work. Just have people come on and do a sketch, you know, and do their catchphrase or whatever, and get off. Or is that the Fast Show? Oh, I'm confused now.
No, the Fast Show was still 4 years away. In 1990, Harry Enfield was the big comedy name in town, and he now had his own television programme. For his new show, Harry needed a collection of new characters with as broad an appeal as possible.
Like a magazine, like a kind of Viz, not quite as rude on telly. That was the idea. I wanted to do mainstream, so I thought, right, well, I'll do family characters. People like Mr. You Don't Want to Do That, who was basically a father-in-law rather than a mother-in-law.
Oh, you don't want to do it like that. You don't want to put the milk in first, you want to put the tea in first and then the milk. Go on, you'll have to make another pot now.
But the inspiration for Harry's most famous family, the Slobs, came from closer to home, in Hackney.
I remember there was a little boy called Tony who was about 3 and his parents lived somewhere upstairs. I never knew the parents. But he was like a really sweet boy, and he'd say, and you'd suddenly hear this thing coming out over the balcony, just go, Tony, come here. And it was just that family, really.
But in order to complete this picture of family bliss, he needed to find the right woman.
I was a fan, like everybody else. I just thought he was fantastic. So when the agent phoned up and said, you know, Harry wants to meet you for a character for the new series, you know, I jumped at it.
Kathy Burke was a familiar face on the big as well as the small screen. In 1983, she was in the controversial women's prison movie Scrubbers. In 1986, Sid and Nancy. And in 1988, French and Saunders. Before going on to play Wayne Slob's better half and make the part of Waynetta her very own.
Wayne?
What?
Do you remember the first time we, you know, you and I, the first
What?
time?
What?
You know, the first time you and me, the first time.
What?
The first time we had sex.
All her characters are kind of a bit vulnerable. Whoever she was doing, and she called me, you know, she'd suddenly go, oh, lover. And you really got the feeling that they were, like, in love, you know. Whereas I just written them as horrible.
What are you doing?
I am smoking a fag.
Yeah, but Capstan full strength.
That's because I'm smoking for two.
Oh, lover.
I thought they were funny and gross, obviously, but I thought there was a lot of room for a lot of loving between the two of them. So I think that's what I brought to it, really.
To broaden the range of characters and add a touch of class, Harry recruited Nick Newman and Ian Hislop, the spitting image writers who created a character from the other end of the social spectrum to Wayne Slob, although their IQs were almost identical.
So I think he actually said all my characters are working class and shout a lot. Have you got any ideas for one that isn't? And we wanted to do this character called Tim Nice But Dim, who was a public school boy, and
who was nice but dim.
But dim.
Ah, nice but dim. Come in.
Head prefect, how was Borstal?
I had a girlfriend, all her friends seemed to work in the city. It was always, you know, who do you work for? Expecting you to go Morgan Grenville. And you went, I'm a comedian. Really? Gosh.
Thought we'd stick to the old champers tonight, as I'm celebrating being pretty seriously loaded at the moment.
We were constantly reading stories about how public school boys were incredibly sharp and went in the city and had red braces and were brilliant. And we thought, well, the people we were at school with weren't.
So you've
been head of this inquiry for 9 months. Have you found anything?
Not yet, no. But I'll let you into a secret in confidence.
Yeah.
This week I came damn near to finding my office.
Harry was playing opposite proper actors, but he was also keen to get his mates on screen.
Well, I think Harry did kind of drag me, not kicking and screaming too much, you know, in front of the camera to do stuff, and being a kind of show-off. I didn't refuse for too long.
What was that? Some bloody sitcom. Life begins at 40. Try telling that to John Lennon.
He was much funnier than any comedian I knew. And Jeff said, you know, he's never done anything. But yeah, he can audition. So he got lots and lots of people in. And Paul was just streets ahead of all of them, so he got the job.
The Old Gits was based on a bloke I used to work with at Hackney Council. I don't like the French. Yeah. And, in fact, I hate the French. Jimmy Savile does a lot of good work for charity. Yeah. But I don't like him either. But, I mean, he was just quite a normal-looking bloke, you know, and then by the time Harry had got hold of him, Harry came up with the look, really, for the Old Gits.
Have we been drinking, sir? I've never met you before in my life. How can we possibly have been drinking?
I mean, the more I was kind of dressed up, the more I could lose myself, really. You know, I mean, you're seeing this. If I do bits of the character, I can't really do them because I'm a bit embarrassed as myself, you know.
Fancy popping round next door whilst he's still at the funeral and turning off the heating on her tropical fish tank? Yeah.
So Paul became a regular in front of the camera, but Harry was less sure about Charlie's acting abilities.
I think from the start, Harry had never particularly meant for me to be involved. He'd wanted Paul to be involved, and Paul had asked me to be involved. Why Harry didn't want me to be involved, you'd have to ask him, I don't know.
You know, when we wrote things, he would read them out. And I was horrible. I'd just say, no, Paul, you read it, because you're crap.
But Charlie did manage to get in on the act now and again.
Hello, Brian. This is Brian. He's at art school.
Is this yours?
Yes, I suppose it is.
Nice boobs.
Well, I think one of the strengths of Harry's show was it wasn't just relentless character comedy sketches. There was quite a variety of texture and different styles in it, like the Chumley Warner pieces.
Good evening, Mr. Chumley Warner.
Good evening, Grayson. Who's that queer little chap you're holding?
We both had lots of fun with Chumley Warner. Not just the character, but the way the film looked.
It's full house at Wembley for one of the top matches of the 1933 season. One of the leading teams of today, Arsenal, formerly the Village Arsenal, against the Liverpool team of 1991. Who are playing for the first time in black and white. And they may also be surprised by the pace of the black and white game.
I like that style. I used to watch them, you know, when I was a student.
You know, when Harry slicked back his hair and put on the suit and had the moustache, and I switched the monitor from colour to black and white, something wonderful happened.
As you can see, Mrs. Armitage here is extremely ugly.
You know, we just thought they were funny. Again, it looked different from all the rest of the stuff.
But it was with their extremely popular Smashy and Nicey that Paul and Harry managed to hit a nerve with the nation and the Radio 1 controllers.
Now it's the 90s and the new controller of Fab FM thinks we're for the scrap heap. Well, I've got a message for you, Mr. So-called Mr. Sir, from Bachman Turner Overdrive. You think we're finished? You ain't seen nothing yet.
People said, cool, that was great putting the boot into them, you know, those old dinosaurs at Radio 1, but we never felt like that at all. It was sort of semi-affectionate, really. Genuinely, you know. It was done with a great deal of affection, I think.
Hi, Fuzzers, and a truly glamorous welcome to Some of the Pops. Nicey.
I've just eaten a whole packet of toppers.
He's bonkers, isn't he? How old are you, my darling?
I think probably of all the characters that I've done before and subsequently, they were probably the most fun. They were great. Thanks, Smashy and Nicey.
In 1992, Harry took the bold step of playing only one character in a half-hour show. He appeared as Dermot in the first series of Men Behaving Badly, alongside Martin Clunes, Leslie Ash and Caroline Quentin.
Where's your hi-fi?
Eh? I'm afraid I had to pawn it to pay for last night.
You what?
Sorry. Never mind, though. I made alternative arrangements for entertainment for the next few days.
Meanwhile, back at the second series of Harry's own show, the men weren't behaving that well either.
There had been some tensions and some arguments, some on-set disputes. And it was fairly clear that there was a bit of a clash between me and Harry.
Harry would reject things not always because he thought they weren't good ideas, but just because he didn't see how it would work for him.
I mean, you know, it was frustrating for them because I was going, I don't find it funny. And if I didn't find it funny, it didn't go in.
And for the press launch for the second series of Harry's show, Geoffrey Perkins had edited together highlights of the series to show off all characters.
You're seeing us in living colour.
Bitch!
Bop, 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 dang, dang, dang. No.
So you'd get little snippets, sort of 20, 30-second bits of all new characters.
I remember Paul and Charlie basically watching it and saying, that would make a great show if you could make a show like that.
So that gave us the idea to do a fast show, really.
So in 1994, the catchphrase-laden Fast Show hit the screens, and nobody could stop Charlie Higson from appearing in it because he was the producer. Brilliant! With help from John Thompson, Arabella Weir, Carolina Hearn, Mark Williams and Simon Day, they created characters that Harry hadn't let them do, which was nice.
I mean, the Suit You was something that we'd been offering to him on his show, and he kept saying, no, I thought it's just a couple of gay tailors, it's not funny.
Kenneth Branagh's is an extraordinary Hamlet, isn't it, sir? Oh, quite exquisite, sir.
Oh, the things he does with his Hamlet beggars belief, sir. I thought I'd seen every type of Hamlet there was till I saw Kenneth. Suit You, sir.
I remember Paul and Charlie pitching Suits You to me, and I just didn't find it funny. You know, I just could not see it. So, of course, that was one of the first characters that goes on and really took off on the Fast Show kind of thing.
Hello, and welcome to Jazz Club. Nice.
Did we learn anything from Harry Enfield show and transfer it to the Fast Show? Get a cast of lots of different talented people and let them do stuff and take the credit for it.
Great. In 1994, Harry was offered another primetime series on BBC One. Charlie was committed to the Fast Show, but Paul did come back, and as the name suggests, Harry Enfield and Chums became less of a one-man band. With the new title came new characters for the Chums to get their teeth into, like the Toddlers, the Self-Righteous Brothers, the considerably richer Brummies, and the Camp Jockeys.
Thanks, Mum.
But one of the most popular characters was Kevin the teenager.
Kevin?
Are you going to thank your mum?
Oh, yeah.
Are you going to say thank you?
I just bloody did!
Harry decided Kevin needed a pal to share his teenage angst with.
And then it was Paul that said to Harry, well, you should get then Kathy to be his mate.
Right, Kev? Here, guess what I've done at school today? I rubbed up against Jennifer Fisher and me Brian went hard.
It was just great fun to play because you could just think back about what teenage boys were like when you were a teenager.
Kevin and Perry struck a chord with the nation's kids, and in 2000, the sketch characters were expanded to fit a brick pick set in Ibiza, and co-writer Harry called on ex-right-hand lover Dave Cummings, by then a veteran Chums and Fast Show writer.
I think the film Kevin and Perry worked in as much as it was basically a knob gag movie for 14-year-old boys.
Oi, Kev, look! It's the girls from the airport!
Zoom, zoom, zoom!
I don't think we ever had any illusions that we were making Citizen Kane or Chinatown.
After 2 series with his Chums, Harry Enfield went solo again in Norman Ormel, a very political turtle, where he played a Tory boy and 10 other characters in a satire written by Craig Brown of Private Eye. The same magazine gave Harry his next project, Sermon from St Albion's, which satirised the Reverend Tony and his cabinet, most of whom were played by Harry. Among the writers were Nick Newman and Ian Hislop.
After each prayer, I will say, Lord, in your mercy, and you reply, the vicar knows best.
Both shows were pretty successful, further showing off Harry's versatility. But when he left the BBC to make his brand spanking new show for Sky, the wheels started coming off the Enfield machine.
David Beckham, a rare substitution for you in the second half. Were you disappointed to be taken off?
No, not really, because whether I play the whole game or just some of it, I get paid the same.
We didn't really have enough time to do it, which was my fault. I scheduled it too early. It was completely my fault.
But then I was relieved because it started to rain. And playing in the rain doesn't suit me. Like, I lose all my control, even with gel.
And I hadn't thought about it. I've been doing Kevin and Perry. But it was all booked in, so we had to kind of do what we could.
Harry's next project was another case of bad timing. In 2002, he played Gary Bloke in Celeb, based on the Private Eye strip.
Here, duckies, come and score some bread.
So we had this kind of quite gentle, witty, quite fun thing about this bloke, you know, who was an old over-the-hill rock star. And then suddenly, this, like, totally anarchic, brilliant piece of real stuff comes out on the other channel.
And that show happened to be the reality soap The Osbournes. Oh well, never mind. In 2001, former Harry Chums Paul Whitehouse and Dave Cummings collaborated on the midlife crisis sitcom Happiness.
Happiness, happiness, the greatest gift that I possess. I thank the Lord that I've been blessed with more than my share of happiness.
After working with Reeves and Mortimer on their wildly original TV shows, Charlie Higson plundered the archives and revived the 60s cult show Randall and Hopkirk Deceased, starring Vic and Bob.
Let's go. Go.
But this too was deceased after 2 series. Charlie is now a used car salesman in Swiss Tony, a sitcom based on the Fast Show character. Since the setback of Celeb, Harry has been taking on more film roles and recently returned to his Pathé period, playing George VI in Churchill: The Hollywood Years. But it was his drive and determination to break into television, his talent for both characterisation and enabling other performers to develop, that makes Harry Enfield one of the most influential comics of his generation.
He single-handedly resurrected the idea of doing character comedy, really.
News. Now give me the remote. Oh, so unfair. I hate you. Thank you.
And if you're a journalist and you want to write a piece about teenage, you mention Kevin. If you want to write a piece about greed, you mention loads of money. I mean, there are a set of characters he created that have just gone into the sort of English comic mainstream, and that's quite an achievement.
Move aside, Flash! Stop now, keep patient.
I don't think we set out to be consciously alternative ever, no. We wanted to do characters that people liked, and I hope that's what we did.
Aha! But would you be? Something tells me you're not in a very good mood today, so I'm going to go up.